Investigators of Valley Homes searched in connection to the Tupac Shakur murder investigation nearly 27 years after his death.
Cops just discovered Tupac's hidden vehicle stored under another name, and it rips open a part of this case that was never supposed to be seen. This was a deliberate layer of separation, and what that means for Tupac's final months is far darker than anyone was prepared for.
You know what I'm saying? It's that situation when you got, we are living in a war zone. It's not as easy as these people are making us think, that they just got some criminal-ass black kids with guns. It is not like that. We live in hell. We live in the gutter. We got us stacked up 80 deep in one building.
For years, the Tupac case was treated as a box already checked. One main car, one main night, one main chain of events. Investigators, media, and even fans operated under the belief that everything that mattered had already been found and logged. But that sense of closure was never real. It came from the idea that if something didn't show up in the original inventory, it probably didn't exist. That's one of the biggest traps in cold cases. This new discovery feels like a crack in the foundation. Because if Tupac had assets that were never in his name, then the official version of his final months was incomplete from the start. Not just missing facts, but missing the hidden layer that only shows up when someone goes looking decades later with better tools and fewer assumptions. And that's exactly what happened. And let me tell you something. Investigators didn't stumble across this vehicle by accident. It came from modern cross-checks that simply didn't exist in the 1990s. Systems that now link insurance records, payment methods, temporary addresses, and ownership history in ways that were impossible back then. What triggered attention wasn't Tupac's name. It was an inconsistency, a vehicle tied to overlapping financial signals that didn't line up with the registered owner, short-term addresses and insurance paid through third parties, patterns that didn't match normal ownership behavior. To a modern system, that stands out. To a 1996 filing cabinet, it disappears. When detectives followed that thread, they didn't find a typo or a clerical mistake. They found a setup. The registration wasn't in Tupac's name, and that wasn't an oversight. That was the design. The structure was built so that if someone searched for Tupac's assets, this vehicle would never surface. It was insulated, buried inside layers meant to defeat casual searches and routine audits. When detectives expanded the search, similar patterns began to emerge. Storage units paid for by third parties, leases under names that didn't match the lifestyle or income of the people listed. Utility bills were tied to associates who had no clear reason to be connected to those locations. Each item could be brushed off individually. Together, they form a system. That's what changed the tone of the investigation. This wasn't random hiding. It wasn't celebrity privacy. It was structured concealment, a parallel layer of assets that didn't touch Tupac's public identity, but still moved with his life. A shadow system that could operate quietly, separate from contracts, labels, and official accounts. To detectives, that signals intent. People don't build parallel asset structures by accident. They do it when they want options, when they want flexibility, when they want protection, when they don't want everything they own tied to the same name, the same people, or the same power structures. And that's where this starts to connect to what was already sitting in the case file, but never fully connected. What makes this heavier is that these hidden structures don't disappear when someone dies. If assets aren't in your name, they don't automatically go to your family. They stay with whoever controls the paperwork, whoever holds the leases, whoever has access to the accounts. That means parts of Tupac's life may have quietly passed into the hands of people who were never publicly connected to him, people who were never questioned, people who were never on the radar. That alone raises uncomfortable questions, not just about what Tupac owned, but about who controlled pieces of his world after he was gone, who had access to things no one else even knew existed, who may have benefited from systems that were designed to stay hidden.
So this is the biggest development in the Tupac murder case since this all happened, since the murder happened. They never served a search warrant and, showed up at someone's house with the SWAT team back in 1996. So this is definitely, it can't be overstated how big of a deal this is.
This is the point in the story where the case stops feeling like a historical file and starts feeling like someone was actively preparing for a disappearance. When investigators finally opened the Valley Homes garage, they did not walk into a celebrity storage space filled with random belongings and leftover studio gear. They walked into a controlled environment that felt intentional, structured, and built for ongoing use. The walls were soundproofed. Heavy-duty shelving lined the space, and everything was labeled and dated. That kind of setup does not belong to someone who is drifting or living moment to moment. It belongs to someone who expects to return, someone who is planning ahead, and someone who does not want certain activities to be overheard or misunderstood. The binders changed the tone of the room almost immediately. These were not casual notebooks filled with ideas. They were thick, organized, and detailed, showing film projects Tupac planned to direct himself, complete with production schedules, budget breakdowns, and casting notes written in his own hand. Alongside those were proposals for nonprofit work, community screenings, and financial plans designed to quietly support bail funds, legal fees, and literacy programs. None of this matched the public image of constant chaos and conflict. The paperwork showed a man building long-term systems, planting roots for a future that looked nothing like the life people saw on stage and in headlines. At that point, the garage stopped looking like storage and became a command center. It reflected a version of Tupac that was methodical, forward-thinking, and quietly focused on what came next. The contrast between his public persona and this private planning was impossible to ignore. While the world saw volatility, the shelves showed structure. While the media saw a man running toward danger, the binder showed a man preparing for life after danger. That alone suggested he was living on two timelines at once, one for public consumption and one for his own survival. The discovery of the pristine BMW in that garage pushed the story into even darker territory. This was not the famous car associated with the shooting, but the same model, kept clean and untouched, as if it was being held in reserve. Psychologically, that matters. People do not buy backup versions of the same vehicle without a reason. That kind of choice reflects contingency planning, a quiet acknowledgement that the current path may not be safe and that an alternative may be needed at a moment's notice. In that context, the car does not look like a luxury item. It looks like part of an exit strategy.
Now, of course, here over the past couple of months, prosecutors have been building their case against Dwayne Keefe D. Davis to indict him in the murder of Tupac Shakur. And these photos and videos are just some of the evidence that was shown to a grand jury, helping them build their case.
That impression only deepened with the handwritten notes referencing Ghana and New York. These were not casual travel ideas or tour concepts. They read like real destinations tied to real decisions. Combined with multiple passports, large amounts of vacuum-sealed cash, international contacts, and financial documents showing the quiet movement of money, the pattern became difficult to dismiss. This was not curiosity or creative exploration. It was preparation. It was the behavior of someone building a door before the room became too dangerous to stay in. When viewed through that lens, the discovery of hidden vehicles and assets under other names no longer feels suspicious in the way people usually think of secrecy. It begins to look strategic. If Tupac believed powerful people could control his money, track his movements, and limit his options, separating assets would not be paranoia. It would be self-protection. It would be a way to make sure not everything in his life could be frozen, seized, or used as leverage against him if he tried to step away.
I like to think I'm a rebel. I'm revolutionary.
He's considered one of the most influential rappers of all time.
We honor and welcome to the Hollywood Walk of Fame, Tupac Shakur!
The DV tapes reinforce this interpretation in a deeply unsettling way. On those recordings, Tupac does not sound fearless or reckless. He sounds tired, pressured, and increasingly aware that the pace and environment of his life were becoming dangerous. He speaks about feeling watched, about losing control, and about realizing that the lifestyle he was living could not continue without serious consequences. This is not the voice of someone chasing conflict for attention. It is the voice of someone recognizing that the rules around him have changed and that staying visible may no longer be safe. That shift reveals how much of his public image may have been armor rather than identity. The aggressive persona starts to look less like who he truly was and more like a shield he used to survive in an environment that demanded strength and fearlessness. Privately, the tape suggests he was becoming more strategic, more cautious, and more focused on long-term survival rather than short-term dominance. In that context, hidden assets, backup vehicles, and quiet financial movement appear less like secrecy and more like defensive planning.
Has never been made public. It showed Tupac there with Suge Knight leaving the MGM. We had seen that other surveillance video that is in color there, but a lot of these photos, we've seen obviously where this shooting happened, but these are the photos and evidence that police have been sitting on now for 27 years.
The situation becomes even more dangerous when death row is reintroduced. Tupac was not simply thinking about leaving a record label, he was quietly building Machiavelli Records outside Suge Knight's control. In the music industry of the 1990s, that was not just a business move, it was a political move. It meant pulling power, revenue, and influence out of an ecosystem built on loyalty, control, and street-level relationships. That kind of separation can turn a successful artist into a liability overnight.
This is now available to the public. It includes pictures and video of the car Shakur was riding in the night of his death. You can see bullet holes scattered all across that vehicle. This newly released evidence showing never-before-seen details in a case that's cracked wide open some 27 years later.
In that environment, independence is not just freedom. It is a threat to people who benefit from control. That is why protection becomes more than personal. It becomes structural. Hidden assets, off-name vehicles, and quiet money movement create layers of insulation. They give someone options if relationships turn hostile. They reduce others' ability to trap, pressure, or financially corner them. This is common behavior in high-risk exits, not just in music, but in any environment where power and money are tightly intertwined. When all of this is connected, the garage no longer feels like an afterthought. It becomes proof that Tupac was already halfway into a different life. 1 foot in the public world of conflict and contracts, and 1 foot in a private world of planning, protection, and escape routes. That dual existence is what makes this part of the case so disturbing. It suggests he was not simply reacting to danger, he was actively building a way out of it. That leads to the most unsettling question of all. If this second life was real, if these plans were in motion, and if assets were separated under other names, then control of that hidden world did not automatically disappear when Tupac died. Someone would have held the paperwork. Someone would have had access. Someone would have known how to move within that shadow system. That means parts of Tupac's story may not have ended in 1996. They may have continued quietly through other people in ways the public never saw.
I'm innocent. I ain't killed nobody, never did ever kill nobody. They don't have no evidence against me. Came and put me in Las Vegas.
This is where the Keith D layer changes how the entire timeline feels. For years, he was treated like a loud side character, someone talking after the fact, someone easy to dismiss. But when he started making detailed public statements, writing about the night, and placing himself closer to the center of events, investigators had to look again. Not because he suddenly became the only answer, but because his talking forced attention back onto people who had always been standing just outside the frame. That's when background figures stopped being background. In cases like this, the loudest names usually get all the focus, while the quieter ones slide right past scrutiny. But shadow systems don't run on main characters alone. They run on helpers, intermediaries, people who don't make headlines but move paperwork, keys, money, and access. Once hidden assets enter the picture, those people suddenly matter a lot more than the obvious faces everyone has argued about for years. Because if Tupac had a parallel system of vehicles, storage, and finances, it is almost impossible that he managed it alone. Someone helped set it up. Someone knew which names to use. Someone paid bills. Someone had access. And after Tupac died, that access didn't magically disappear. That's the uncomfortable part. Hidden systems don't die with their creator. They get inherited, controlled, or quietly absorbed by whoever is positioned closest to them. That's where things start to feel less like a mystery and more like a chessboard. When assets are under other people's names, control follows paperwork, not bloodlines. That means parts of Tupac's world may never have gone through his family at all. They may have moved sideways, quietly, into hands no one ever looked at closely. Not through dramatic theft, but through boring, invisible processes like leases, registrations, and accounts that never had Tupac's name on them to begin with. What once looked like randomness now looks like structure. What once looked like chaos now looks like someone trying to stay one step ahead of forces he believed were closing in. And that forces law enforcement to rethink assumptions that may have been baked into the case for decades. Because if part of Tupac's life was hidden by design, then part of the investigation was always aimed at an incomplete picture. The tragic part is that all of these points to a second act that was already in motion. The binders, the tapes, the backup vehicles, the businesses, the quiet financial planning all show that Tupac was not just dreaming about change. He was operationalizing it. He was building it in real time. The Las Vegas shooting did not just end a life. It froze a transformation that was already underway. That's why these discoveries feel less like solving a puzzle and more like opening a locked room full of futures that never happened. Tupac did not just die in 1996. A carefully planned reinvention died with him. A version of his life that never got the chance to exist was erased before anyone even knew it was being built. And now, decades later, investigators are finally seeing the outlines of what was lost and realizing that the story they thought they knew may have been only half the truth.